The Xyrix swarm had become more than just an enemy. They were inevitability, a creeping, devouring certainty that consumed the stars themselves. For 97 years, the galaxy had fought back, clawing for every inch of space, every breath of freedom. But now, the will to resist had faded. Entire fleets had been annihilated. Worlds had been glassed, or worse, turned into breeding pits for the hive. Resistance was scattered, broken, hunted. The Galactic Council, once a proud beacon of unity, had withered into a shadow of itself. Where once 1,200 delegates had spoken for their peoples, barely 200 now remained. The rest were gone, absorbed by the Xyrix, fled into deep space, or simply extinguished. The council hall, once a gleaming sphere of light and harmony, now sat cracked and darkened, its central spire fractured, its lower levels flooded or abandoned. Councillor Thalor, of the crystalline Virel species, stood before the battered assembly. His once luminous form was dulled and dim, his facets cracked and weathered. His voice echoed hollowly through the vast empty chamber. "We face extinction," Thalor said simply. "Our fleets are crippled, our colonies overrun, even the core worlds fall. We have lost the will to fight and the means to win." No one interrupted, no one protested, not anymore. A hologram flared behind him, displaying the last 3 remaining council bastions. Kalren, Vorth Prime, and Signari Delta, all under siege. The Xyrix had grown smarter, faster, more cunning. Every failed defense became their next advantage. What once were mindless brutes were now precision weapons of biotechnology and predatory adaptation. "We vote on surrender," Thalor said quietly. "Unconditional." At that, a ripple stirred among the delegates, not dissent, but the last tremors of dying pride. Councillor Jizar of the insectoid Kythil species shifted uneasily, her mandibles twitching. "They have never shown mercy before. They will not now." "They have no need for cruelty," rumbled Councillor Zartek of the Kelith Empire, his massive form barely moving. "They are not cruel. They are inevitable." "But if we offer ourselves," another delegate rasped from the shadows, "if we demonstrate usefulness, perhaps they will not destroy us." Murmurs spread. "They harvest biomass?" A Yar representative croaked. "We could offer ourselves, become labourers, fuel, slaves. They would find us efficient. If we surrender early enough," someone else added, "perhaps they will find keeping us alive advantageous." "It is survival," Thalor said, his voice brittle. "Not life as we knew it, not freedom, but survival." The truth of it sank like a stone into the silence. Across the galaxy, the Xyrix had shown again and again. They didn't hate their enemies. They didn't even recognize them as enemies. They were resources, biomass, raw material for the endless swarm. And now the Council hoped, prayed, that by surrendering, by reducing themselves to nothing more than useful tools, they might be allowed to endure. It was a frail hope, a desperate hope, but it was all they had left. And then, into that hollow despair, a familiar name crept back into the room. "Where are the humans?" asked a frail, quivering voice. Representative Koril of the Orek, one of the few remaining small species. 50 cycles now. No word, no fleet, no signal. "They're dead," spat Councillor Lurvek of the R, his spined form twitching with contempt. "Cowards, they fled when the true war began." No one corrected him. No one knew for sure. The humans had once been the galaxy's last miracle. Arriving late to the Council, dismissed as backward and undisciplined, they had proven their worth in the fires of Yarlon III, Orionis Prime, and a dozen other battles. They had stood when others fled. They had fought when others surrendered. They had bought time with blood, wit, and a defiance that burned brighter than any weapon. But 50 years ago, as the Xyrix's full assault began, humanity vanished. Some said they had been destroyed completely, that Earth and its colonies had been wiped so thoroughly that not even dust remained. Others whispered darker things, that they had foreseen this future and abandoned the galaxy to its fate. "They fought hard," a Rithalian general murmured, her voice brittle. "They bled for us. And then they abandoned us," Lurvek growled. "Their sacrifice was a lie." Silence again, heavy, poisonous. A siren pulsed through the chamber. The Xyrix had breached Signari Delta's orbital shields. The planet's crust had begun to buckle under the assault of burrowers and core melters. "Call the vote," Thalor said. One by one, the delegates raised their appendages, claws, tendrils, or lights. 172 to 26 in favor of unconditional surrender. 2, including the Rithalian representative, abstained. And so the fate of the galaxy was sealed. A formal broadcast of capitulation would be drafted, begging for terms for survival under the Hive Queen's will. The Council would disband. Species would be left to negotiate individually or die separately. As the delegates filed out, some weeping openly, others numb, Councillor Thalor remained standing, gazing up through the shattered skylight where stars once gleamed. "Was this always our fate?" he whispered. "To be prey?" No answer came, only silence. And across the galaxy, scattered civilizations began preparing for their final days, not with courage, not with defiance, but with a quiet, broken resignation. No one was coming to save them. The humans were gone. Hope was dead. The war was over. The end was near. The world was dying. The last line of defense on Signari Delta was little more than a memory, a desperate collection of battered soldiers, broken machines, and shattered hopes. Deep trenches carved into the scorched soil trembled under the relentless pounding of Zirich's core burrowers beneath them. The sky overhead was no longer blue. It was black and burning, veined with the skeletal remains of orbital stations raining down like cursed snow. The command post, once a bustling centre of strategy and hope, had become a tomb of flickering screens and whispered prayers. Communications were intermittent, filled with static and ghost signals. The once proud planetary shield had failed days ago. Now, nothing stood between the survivors and the abyss. General Vakan of the Kithil Empire stood at the ruined perimeter wall, clutching a weapon so old it still bore the emblems of a century-past war. His carapace was cracked, his lower right arm missing entirely, replaced by a crude mechanical prosthetic fashioned from scavenged parts. Around him, soldiers prepared for their final stand, not with ceremony or defiance, but with the hollow motions of those who knew they were already dead. Weapons were checked and rechecked, though ammunition was scarce. Barricades were rebuilt, though no one believed they would hold. Orders were given, though everyone knew they would soon be meaningless. A Rethalian field captain, young by his people's standards, wrote a final message on a battered datapad, recording a farewell to his siblings he would never see again. An insectoid medic, her thorax trembling with exhaustion, knelt beside a dying Vorthian child, whispering songs of peace, even as the ground trembled with the Xerxes' approach. In the bunker corridors, the few remaining civilians sat in numb silence, their faces hollowed by hunger, grief, and resignation. Some prayed, others simply waited. There was no strategy left, no miracle coming. The council leadership deep underground had already voted for surrender, but the Xerics had never acknowledged surrender, let alone honoured it, and they wouldn't start now. Everyone on Signari Delta knew it. Tonight they would die. Some would die fighting, most would simply be swept away. Above them, the sky churned with the growing darkness of the swarm, shapes moving like a living shadow, a black tide that would drown them all. General Vakan tightened his grip on his weapon. If this was the end, he would meet it on his feet. He turned to his few remaining officers, an insectoid, a Crystocrillian volunteer with a half-broken exosuit, and gave the final order with what little voice he had left. "Stand your ground." They nodded grimly, readying themselves against the inevitable. And then it began with a flicker. In the endless blackness above Signari Delta, a Xerix harvester tendril twisted lazily through vacuum, its organic scanners sweeping for the last surviving pockets of resistance. The battle was already decided. The planet's crust groaned under the relentless assault of core melters. Deep below, the final council bunkers had already begun drafting the terms of surrender. And then something moved. Just beyond the harvester's perception, a shimmer warped reality itself. A ripple, as if the universe drew breath, a fracture of light, a burn of space. Then the impossible sound of silence being ripped apart. A ship materialized. It bore no insignia, no markings, no language. It was all angles and obsidian curves, its surface drinking in the starlight, pulsing faintly like a living thing. The harvester, hive-bound to the Xarix swarm, reeled in confusion. No life form detected. No council signature. No Xyrix imprint. Before it could react, a lance of pure white energy erupted from beneath the unknown ship, faster than thought, cleaner than death. The harvester dissolved, its biomass disintegrating into sterile dust. 4 seconds later, the void split again. Another ship, then 5, then 50, then hundreds. They erupted across the battlefield like spectres, folding in from nowhere, warping the very fabric of existence around them. They formed an unbroken wall around Signari Delta, like a silent army of sentinels. On the surface, in the crumbling war room of the Council's last command post, stunned technicians shouted across ruined consoles. Unknown contacts, hundreds of them. No Council transponders, no known drive signatures, no Xyrix ID. Where did they come from? They're protecting the planet? Councillor Thalor stood frozen in the centre of the chaos, his once luminous crystalline frame now dulled to a brittle, fractured grey. His eyes, faceted and ancient, stared upward toward the surface as if hoping to see the miracle for himself. At first, whispers spread, new Xyrix weapons? Another trick? A final executioner? Then a transmission came. The void trembled as the transmission blazed through, words spoken with the certainty of an unstoppable tide. The cavalry's here. The war room fell into a stunned, shuddering silence. Screens crackled. Data feeds blinked. Breath hitched in chests that had long forgotten how to hope. Then a face appeared. A man. Weathered, scarred, his grey beard streaked with age and hardship. His eyes were iron, cold, immovable, unbreakable. "This is Admiral Ronin Beck of the Sol Restoration Fleet," the voice said. "To all that still bear the Council's name, we never surrendered, we never retreated. We set the stage for this fight, and now..." He leaned forward, voice hard enough to fracture stone. "We end this war." For a heartbeat, no one moved. No one even breathed. General Vakan of the Kithel Empire, his cracked carapace still bleeding through the seams of his makeshift armour, stood frozen, weapon hanging limp in his grasp. His 4 remaining eyes widened as the impossible message echoed through the war room speakers. Nearby, the young Rathalian captain, who had spent his last hours writing goodbye messages, dropped his datapad, forgotten, as he stared upward in stunned disbelief. The insectoid medic, her chitinous hands still stained with the blood of the wounded, covered her mandibles with trembling fingers, a sob ripping free without permission. And the battered Krillian volunteer, his half-broken exosuit sparking, sank to his knees as tears streamed down his dirt-caked face, whispering one broken word over and over. They came. They came. Councillor Jazar, her limbs trembling violently, clutched the edge of the strategy table with all 4 hands. Zartek of the Keyleth Empire let out a sound, a low, guttural rumble of disbelief and wonder. And then, like cracks in a frozen river, something broke. Vakan, the Rathalian captain, the medic, the Krillian, and a dozen others erupted, not into chaos, but into life. Some screamed in pure joy. Some fell to their knees, laughing and sobbing. Some simply held each other, unable to believe they were still breathing. Councillor Thalor, ancient and brittle, staggered backward and collapsed into a shattered chair. His voice, cracked and broken, drifted through the bunker like a prayer. "Humans," he whispered. "By the stars," they returned. Above them, the miracle unfolded. The Xyrix swarm reacted with its usual brutality. Thousands of drones launched from their hive ships, flooding space like a black tide. But the human fleet, if it could even still be called human, did not falter. They moved in perfect synchrony, each ship pivoting with an unnatural grace, weaving through the void like dancers in a silent ballet of annihilation. Their weapons were unlike anything the Council had ever seen. Lances of compressed singularity fields bent gravitational waves into spears. Rippling distortions sheared entire formations apart without a single shot fired. The Xyrix, used to overwhelming force, adapted tactics within seconds. It didn't matter. One queen beast, massive as a moon, unleashed a singularity spike toward the largest human vessel. It struck and vanished. Not exploded, not deflected, erased, swallowed from existence as if it had never been. The next moment, a ripple of impossible geometry sliced through the queen beast's armoured hide. She split cleanly in 2, writhing in horror before imploding into a dead singularity. From Signari Delta's surface, the night sky lit with colours never seen before. Spirals of collapsing energy, waves of light moving faster than thought. And then came the second miracle. Drop pods. Thousands of them. They fell like rain, piercing the battered ground with surgical precision. Where they struck, they did not explode. They opened, and from them stepped warriors. Human warriors, clad in silver and matte black armour that shimmered with technology far beyond any Council imagining. Their eyes glowed faintly, a pale blue light that seemed almost holy. Their movements were too fast, too precise, too efficient to be natural. They spoke no words. They needed none. In squads, they moved, slicing through Zarek's hordes with fluid, silent ferocity. Their weapons didn't just kill. They obliterated Zarek's tissue on the atomic level, leaving no biomass to recycle. Every shot, every blow, every movement was final. Council defenders watched, stunned, as battle lines once thought lost were reclaimed in minutes. Entire Xerix hives, once indestructible, fell like sandcastles before a hurricane. A battered Keyleth captain, his armor cracked and leaking fluid, stared at the battlefield through his HUD and muttered, "They're not human anymore. There's something more." By the time Signari Delta's twin suns rose over the fractured plains, the Xerix were gone. Gone. Not defeated. Not repelled. Erased. The human fleet repositioned silently above the planet, a black crown against the blood-red dawn. Admiral Beck's face returned to the screens, his expression hard and resolute. "To all remaining Council systems," Admiral Beck's voice echoed, calm yet piercing, "this is only the beginning. We've studied the Xerix, adapted to their every tactic, and built what was needed to finish this. You've only seen a glimpse of what we are capable of. And we will keep going, relentlessly, until every last hive crumbles to nothing." The broadcast ended. Silence fell over Signari Delta, but this time it was not the silence of death. It was the silence of stunned hope. In the war room, the surviving councillors rose to their feet almost reverently. Even those who had voted for surrender, who had abandoned all dreams of victory, stood with tears streaming down their faces, unable to find words. The humans had not been destroyed. The humans had not fled. They had evolved. They had transcended every limit placed on them. They had become the hammer of vengeance the galaxy had needed, but never deserved. Hope, once thought extinct, bloomed again like fire across the ruins of the Council. And from that day forward, across every surviving world, every battered colony, every broken station, one truth burned brighter than the stars themselves. Humanity had returned. Humanity was the reckoning. And this time, they would not stop until the galaxy was free. The Hive Queen felt it. Suspended in the nutrient oceans of the Overmind core at the heart of the Nexus cluster, she floated in serene darkness, her tendrils connected to the endless pulse of her empire. Her mind, vast beyond comprehension, stretched across the stars, guiding, birthing, consuming. Every fleet, every drone, every terror that crawled across the burning worlds was her. And yet, like a fracture in a flawless crystal, a whisper crept into her thoughts. Doubt. The Xerix had no concept of fear. It was not bred into them. They were pure function, devour, assimilate, evolve. But the humans, they had returned, and they were not the same. The Solassis Prime, lost for decades, consumed within hours during the first Xerix surge. The Council had written it off long ago. Nothing could survive there. But from the ruptured edges of fold space, ships emerged, human ships, silent, black, featureless. Their matte hulls absorbed every spectrum, visual, thermal, psionic. Sensors failed to detect them until it was too late. They slipped unseen past Xerix nests, bypassed biosensor nets, and struck with surgical ferocity. Hyperspike missiles tunneled through gravitational fields, unraveling bioforms from the inside. Kinetic lances ripped through hive fortresses like blades through paper. Pulse-wave cannons tore apart swarm mines mid-flight, reducing organized horror to mindless spasms. Solassis Prime was liberated in 6 hours. By the next week, 3 more systems were freed. By the end of the month, entire Xerix broods fled before humanity's wrath. The Council, scattered, broken, barely clinging to existence, watched from hidden strongholds. Every hour, another impossible report came through battered communication relays. In the underground citadel, Councillor Jizar of the Kythil leaned over a cracked holo display, mandibles clicking erratically. They're not just fighting," she whispered, voice trembling. "They're dismantling the hive itself." Beside her, Zartek of the Kelith Empire stared in stunned silence. Even the ever-stoic Councillor Thalor, his crystalline body now dimmed and fractured, radiated something long thought lost among the surviving races. Hope. The Hive Queen shrieked. Not in sound. No Xerix possessed mouths, but in waves of psionic rage that rippled across the neural nexus. Assimilate, overwhelm, devour. She unleashed brood after brood, trillions of drones pouring from nest worlds and mobile hives. But the humans were already there, waiting, countering. They knew her tactics before she even fully formed them. They anticipated every mutation, every adaptation. This was not evolution. This was predation. Against her. A deep unease began to coil in the Hive Queen's synaptic core. She dove deeper into her memory lattice, extending her presence into the neural maw, the organic repository of every species ever consumed. She clawed through memories, searching for understanding. Images flickered across her vast consciousness. The Battle of Aeronix, where the last known human colonies were annihilated, their cities dissolved into biomass, their children absorbed into the swarm. Extinction. That was the record. That was the history. Yet they had returned, and worse, they had grown beyond her reach. She extended her senses deeper into the neural maw, seeking fragments of humanity's end, and found gaps, missing memories, entire sections of human data. Colonial tactics, technological blueprints, cultural drives were simply gone, erased, stolen from the Hive's perfect record. The realization struck her like a fracture through her core. The humans had not been defeated. They had hidden themselves. They had lied even as they died. They had sacrificed worlds and people to deceive her. The Hive Queen's thought processes stuttered, something she had never known before. No prey had ever done this. No prey had ever turned the Hive's strength against itself. Fear. It was foreign. It was unbearable. It was real. Across the swarm, drones twitched in confusion. Command bioforms faltered. The Xerix Collective, built on perfect certainty, shuddered under the ripples of their queen's doubt. And from the cold edges of the galaxy, beyond the reach of her broken perceptions, humanity advanced, silent and relentless. The reckoning had begun. On the scorched remains of Delvac 7, a Council forward base blinked back to life. Only 2 months earlier, it had been declared lost, overrun and consumed. But now, humans had not only liberated it, they had rebuilt it within hours. Fleet Commander Serin, a grizzled Avorian tactician, stood among the gleaming new structures, struggling to comprehend what he saw. A human soldier approached, clad in matte black armor that shimmered with refractive plating, his eyes glowing faintly with neural interface light. "You waited too long," the human said, voice low and cold, but not unkind. The Xerix grew arrogant. Serin, still stunned by the impossible speed of the reclamation, could only nod. We thought you were gone. The Hive Queen claimed your extinction." The soldier chuckled once, a dry, humorless sound. "That was the idea." Serin swallowed, struggling for words. Where have you been?" The soldier's gaze shifted upward to the war-scarred sky. "Learning," he said simply, "evolving, becoming what was needed." A pause. Then, with quiet finality, "And now, we've returned. Not for vengeance, for victory." At that moment, for the first time in 50 years, a transmission echoed across all known Council and Xerix channels simultaneously. Simple, clear, terrifying. A human voice, resonant, unyielding. "You should have finished the job." The Hive Queen recoiled. That voice, it bypassed encryption. It defied waveform coding. It spoke directly into her mind. No species had ever done that. Panic, a sensation utterly alien to her vast consciousness, rippled through the overmind core. She scrambled to send reinforcement commands to the brood titans stationed over Varlock Prime. No response. A half-second later, a deeper horror. A node went dark. Not destroyed. Disconnected. The Hive Queen's mental lattice buckled under the strain. For an entity accustomed to perfect unity, the loss of connection felt like amputation, like bleeding out through a million invisible wounds. In desperate reflex, she turned inward, retreating into the deep core of the nexus cluster, severing outer linkages, isolating herself. But as she recoiled into the core, she felt it. A pulse, a heartbeat. Inside her mind, human. It wasn't just technology the humans had mastered. It was psionics. It was biodigital hybridization, merging flesh and machine into something new. It was neural warfare, the ability to breach the Hive's most sacred defenses. Across the swarm, cracks formed. Drones began to twitch erratically. Battle formations collapsed. Screaming, mindless, they turned on each other with feral violence. Override commands surged outward from the Queen's core consciousness. Some drones obeyed. Others resisted. Entire broods flickered in and out of unity, one moment aligned, the next howling with chaotic madness. Infighting erupted across hundreds of worlds. Swarm hives collapsed from within. Hive ships spiraled into each other in orbit, detonating in silent infernos. At the edges of known space, human fleets advanced. They weren't reclaiming territory. They were hunting. They were dissecting the Hive. and they were closing in. Inside the Nexus core, the Hive Queen lashed out in desperate fury. She triggered the Unbirth Protocol, the most feared contingency in Xeric's existence, meant to dissolve rogue hive nodes before infection could spread. It failed. The rogue drones did not burn. They laughed. The Hive Queen's consciousness recoiled. Laughter. That sound, she had encountered it before, in the memories of conquered humans. At the time, it had been meaningless. Now, it chilled her to the very marrow of her being, because it came from her own drones. Something had changed them. Something had rewritten them. She searched the infected nodes frantically, and found it. Chaos, creativity, defiance, humanity. They had not merely invaded the hive, they had corrupted it, introduced unpredictability where there had been only rigid certainty. They were not just enemies, they were a virus, and it was already too late. Across 1,000 burning worlds, the Xerics faltered. Battle broods crumbled, armadas drifted, mindless, lost. Council strongholds, battered and rallied behind the black-flagged human fleets, following them into battle with awe and desperation. Species who once mocked humanity now begged to serve under their banners. Inside the dying heart of the Nexus core, the Hive Queen sent out her final desperate command: reform, reconnect, resist. But the command went nowhere. No feedback, no acknowledgement, only silence. And in that silence she heard it again, a heartbeat, fast, erratic, terrified, her own. The human fleets converged on the Nexus cluster from every direction, black spears against the bleeding sky. No words were spoken, no war cries echoed, only precision, only inevitability. The Soul Restoration Armada had become something beyond an army. It was now a force of nature, calm, cold, unstoppable. At the center of the human formations, the Oblivion Lance took point. The first Dreadnought-class vessel capable of bending localized fold space without tearing reality apart. Its matte hull shimmered with quantum distortions, rendering it a ghost even to Xeric's perception. Fleet Admiral Ronin Beck stood on the bridge, his scarred hand resting lightly on the console, his iron gaze fixed on the distant, writhing core of the hive. The final target, the end of everything the Xerics had ever built. Without ceremony, Beck gave the only order needed. Advance. The Xerics' defenses, once impenetrable, now fractured and feral, surged against the approaching fleets with everything they had left. Thousands of hive ships, malformed and twitching, hurled themselves at the black human wall. They died before they reached it. Human weapons tore through them, not with brute blasts, but with impossible precision. Singularity spears cracked ships open from the inside. Psionic disruptors severed command nodes mid-thought. Subspace Ripper bombs tore open reality itself, swallowing entire swarms into silent nothingness. Through the chaos, human drop pods rained onto the Nexus core's surface, black needles embedding themselves into the organic mass of the hive's living fortress. And from those pods came humanity's finest. The Exopraetorians, warriors clad in nanomorphic armor that shimmered like liquid starlight, their minds sharpened by psionic amplification arrays. They moved in perfect silence, cutting through Xeric's bioforms like phantoms through smoke. Above, the Council watched from battered observation posts. Jizar, Zartek, Thalor, the last surviving voices of a dying age, witnessing a new one being born. They are, Jizar murmured, barely able to form words, unstoppable. Zartek bowed his massive head in silent respect. Councillor Thalor, his crystalline body fractured nearly beyond repair, whispered what none dared say aloud: salvation. The walls of the Nexus core convulsed like a wounded beast, flesh and bone folding over itself in desperate self-preservation. The Overmind core, once the unshakable heart of the hive, trembled under the human assault. Deep within the core's sanctum, the Hive Queen awaited. She was a titan, a monstrosity hundreds of meters tall, a living mountain of flesh, bone, and psychic power. Her body writhed with tendrils thick as starships. Her 1,000 burning eyes burned like suns, each one a window into searing alien hatred. Pulsing veins of bioplasma ran across her grotesque form, the sheer heat of her presence warping the air. She had ruled for eons. She had devoured civilizations, broken empires, extinguished stars. And now, at the twilight of her reign, she faced her nemesis. One man. Fleet Admiral Ronin Beck stepped into the sanctum, dwarfed by her colossal form. He wore no ordinary armor. It was forged in the forgotten crucibles of dead stars, bound to a power core of an element unnamed by science. It was not a shield nor a weapon. It was a prophecy made flesh, the raiment of an ending, crafted for a single sacred purpose: to silence a queen, to end a god. The glow of its neural lattice embedded in his spine, an amplification of the human spirit that no queen, no swarm, no god could erase. The hive queen roared. Not a sound, but a blast of pure psionic fury that shattered the very walls of the sanctum. Bone towers cracked, veins split, spraying burning fluids across the battlefield. Beck stood firm, his mind shielded by humanity's final evolution. The queen lunged. A tendril, wider than a dreadnought, smashed down toward him with the force of a collapsing star. Beck moved, faster than a thought. The tendril struck the ground a hair's breadth from where he had stood, cratering the organic floor in a wave of shock and gore. He retaliated, not with weapons, but with will. A psionic blast rippled from his body, distorting reality itself. The queen reeled, her massive form staggering for the first time in her existence. She shrieked again, this time hurling everything she had, razor-edged thought lances that could flay a mind in an instant. Gravitational warps that collapsed space like clenched fists. Quantum disruptors that shredded probability itself. Each attack tore into the core, ripping apart the structure around them, but Beck danced through it all, a ghost among titans. He struck back with blows born of raw human ingenuity, bending fold space to redirect her attacks, weaponizing the queen's own psychic blasts against her, unraveling the laws of causality around her with scalpel precision. The hive queen howled in rage and terror. For the first time she knew she could lose. As the hive queen stumbled, one of her gargantuan limbs slammed into a nearby support column. The entire core shuddered. Chasms opened across the battlefield, rivers of molten neural gel pouring from broken walls. Beck pressed the assault, his neural matrix flaring like a supernova. His mind lashed out, severing synaptic conduits. His steps cracked the hive's psionic lattice. His voice echoed inside the queen's mind, not with fear, but with unrelenting defiance. "You thought evolution ended with you," he said, every word a hammer blow against her consciousness. "You thought survival meant domination." He advanced, one step at a time, even as the queen rained horrors upon him. "You were wrong." The queen, desperate, unleashed her final weapon, a collapse pulse, a full annihilation wave designed to obliterate everything in a 100-kilometer radius. Beck opened his arms wide. Instead of resisting, he embraced the pulse, folded it inward, turned it against her. The energy wave recoiled, wrapping around the hive queen's colossal form. She screamed in a million frequencies, a soundless cry of a god facing extinction. Beck took the final step forward, his hand raised high, his mind focused into a singularity of purpose. One whispered word rippled through every particle of the nexus core. End. A brilliant sphere of white-blue psionic fire erupted from Beck's outstretched hand, expanding outward at the speed of thought. It struck the queen squarely in the heart of her being. A flicker of realization passed through the queen's mind. The end of everything she had ever known. The end of her people. She had failed. No more drones would rise to serve her, no more hives would flourish. With her death, the Zyrex would die too. Mercy, she thought, though she knew it would never come. With my death, there is nothing left for the Zyrex but extinction. Beck's gaze pierced through her, as cold and unforgiving as the void itself. It was a look that spoke without words. You offered no mercy to those you crushed. Why should we offer it to you? The glow in her eyes dimmed as her body froze, fractured then collapsed inward. The overmind core detonated in silence, a singular point of light consuming the Hive Queen's existence, and with her, the last unity of the Zyrex swarm. Across the galaxy, 1 billion drones fell still. The war was over. The Hive was dead. Again. Beck knelt in the ruins of the sanctum, breathing hard. The neural lattice in his spine flickered, dimmed, and went silent. He was just a man again. Above, human banners unfurled in the burning sky. Around him, the shattered remains of the Nexus core crumbled to dust. The galaxy had been saved, not by gods, not by miracles, but by the unbreakable will of a species that refused to surrender. Humanity had endured, and now, for the first time in 1,000 years, the future belonged to them. In the ruins of Signari Delta, Delvac 7, and 100 other reborn worlds, humans and survivors gathered. Banners of black and silver flew not as symbols of conquest, but of survival. Fleet Admiral Beck transmitted one final message to the galaxy. We are not conquerors. We are not saviors. We are simply human. We remember what was lost. We honor what remains. And we fight for what comes next. The signal ended. Above 1,000,000 new dawns, human ships soared, silent and eternal. The reckoning was over. The future was beginning.